Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We have a number on the line, and I think over the next minute or so there'll be more that'll add, but we may just get underway. So very excited to have with me Richard Irving, the Chairman and CEO of Fluence Group. As I'm sure most of you know, Fluence is a leader in the decentralized water, wastewater, and reuse treatments market, setting the industry pace with its smart product solutions, including Aspiral, NeuroBox, and Subre. So Richard, we felt that it was worthwhile to come back and reflect post the first quarter result, which was released. Sorry, the full year result that was released. Just another sort of reiteration of the actual strategic repositioning that we described at that point in time. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Richard. I'm going to share the screen. So it's in your hands, Richard.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate everybody joining the call and really welcome this opportunity to just maybe say a few words about the company in the first 10 minutes or so, and then give you all a chance to ask questions. And I'm really going to try to put more context around where we're going and why it matters, rather than kind of just give you the familiar stuff. And for those of you that are new to the Fluence story, I'll try to give a little bit of context so it's clear what we're about and why it matters. So Adrian, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, that would be great. So many of you who've been following the company know that our core technology asset is MABR, which is an extremely energy efficient way to treat wastewater to a very high quality level. And its competitiveness has already been proven in the China market and Southeast Asia and other geographies, simply because it can deliver the high quality that those geographies are increasingly embracing at the lowest cost. And that's really, really important, even in the China market, which, as you can imagine, is extremely competitive. But why this matters is actually very, very interesting. All of you that have followed the story know we've talked endlessly about decentralized solutions. And I really want to talk here on this slide about the fact that there's no doubt in our mind, there's no doubt in my mind that all of the things that are happening in water and wastewater treatment will eventually move to a decentralized model. And the reason for that is, I think, very well illustrated by the graph that you see on the bottom left there. Today, out of that approximately $150 billion of CapEx that is spent every year just on wastewater, we're talking now, more than half, about 2/3, is actually spent on the networks. This is actually collecting the wastewater and getting it to the plant. So most of the CapEx you're spending isn't even going on treatment. It's just moving the stuff around. If you can go to a completely decentralized model, then within the same CapEx budget, you can actually do double the amount of treatment. You're spending the same amount of money, but you can save 90% on the cost of the network. And so what does that mean? Well, imagine you had a city with, let's say, a bunch of outlying communities on the periphery. Under the centralized approach, all of those have to join into a centralized system, and then there are larger and larger pipes as you get toward the centralized plant. That's where you really spend the money. These are often very large diameter, up to 20 feet in diameter or 6 meters in diameter. And they have to be at a gradient because the wastewater has to flow downhill. Therefore, you have to have pumping stations. And this is why that kind of infrastructure is so expensive. Now, if instead of that model, you had a small decentralized plant, let's say in each subdivision of houses, let's say 500 homes per plant, all you need to do is to run the standard sewer piping that you do out of domestic or commercial buildings into that decentralized plant, and you have the complete solution. From there on, you can reuse the water for irrigation, you can discharge it, you don't need the rest of the network. So that reduces your network cost by 90%, the CapEx, and it reduces the OpEx by 90%. And why is MABR so well suited to enable this? Well, it's simply because if you've got lots of small plants, it means they're going to be close to people. They're not going to be in some obscure location in the city that nobody goes near, and therefore nobody cares about the noise and the smell and all the rest of it. They're going to be in the middle of neighborhoods. They're going to be in the middle of commercial buildings and so on. And so it's terribly important that those plants are silent, they're odorless, and they can blend into the environment. And that is exactly what our MABR enables uniquely, we believe, to Fluence at size ranges all the way from clusters of homes up to potentially centralized plants with our Subre product. And so this we believe over time will shift the capital allocation from the networks to the plants, resulting in a major decrease in OpEx, partly enabled directly by MABR and partly because those networks are just smaller. And of course, it provides a local source of recycled water. You know all about the need for recycled water in Australia to offset drinking water demand. But the problem is if you have a centralized plant, what are you going to do with all of the recycled water that comes out of that? You have to build another pipe network because it can't go in the drinking network to take it to where you're going to use it. The decentralized solutions solve that problem. So you lower demand for drinking water, you lower the cost of everything you're doing, CapEx and OpEx. And we believe that this is what Fluence enables. And in fact, I would say we're not just talking new build here. If you think about particularly the eastern half of the United States, if you think about many locations in Europe and many other locations around the world, the infrastructure in the ground is rotting, it's breaking, it's leaking, it's failing. How do you replace a 20-foot diameter pipe? It's just absolutely impossible. And I would argue that not only will these decentralized solutions be in those outlying communities for a city, but eventually they will migrate into the city because an overlay network can bypass the deteriorated infrastructure and do it at a tiny fraction of the cost in such a way that it can easily be upgraded. And of course, perhaps the most important thing to emphasize is because our MABR needs virtually no maintenance, these plants can operate automatically. Again, a little plant in a neighborhood can't have people that need to be there every day. So automated operation is a key enabler. This is incredibly important. So Adrian, if you mind going to the next slide. So we've really reached the point now where our MABR technology is no longer something new on the market. 235 plants have been sold. We have clear evidence for a period of years in many cases that we can deliver very high quality wastewater treatment. We can do it at extremely low energy savings, extremely low cost. And we've got ample evidence, as I say, that this works in many different geographies, many different temperatures, many different size ranges. And we're very excited about the fact that not only can we sell that capital equipment, which, as you know, we've done very successfully in China, but also the fact that MABR really enables water reuse because of what I said earlier about the fact that it's a local source that you can just reuse, let's say, to irrigate landscaping within a home subdivision. And that's terribly important because of the recurring revenue. Those of you that have followed the story for a long time know we talked about that a fair amount years ago, but it's something that we are really rekindling now that we have all of the proof from the field that our technology is highly reliable. And I'll explain in a minute what I mean by that. In addition, all of these plants we've been deploying, all these 235 MABR plants, we've been logging all of the operating data for all of those plants. We know exactly what the flows have been. We know exactly how the quality of the effluent. This is enabling us using that data on an anonymized basis to actually provide analytic services to the plant operators so they can continually improve the performance of their plants. And that, of course, gives us yet another source of recurring revenue, which we're very excited about. That's a product we'll launch in the coming months. But we've got the database, and that database continues to grow that will enable us to do that. Now, in the same time that we've deployed 235 plants, our nearest competitor in MABR has deployed 12. So I think that really makes it overwhelmingly clear we're the leader in this area. And it's because of the fact they're so flexible on size ranges, as well as the fact that we are so well proven, out there in the marketplace. So the immediate targets continue to be for us in terms of selling will be China, Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. And I'm not going to give you any time frame on the predictions here, but we've talked before about the incredible importance of partnerships for us. These have already been incredibly valuable for us in China in scaling up. So we're not selling one plant at a time, but we're selling potentially dozens of plants at a time through the same partner in multiple locations. You can certainly expect to see the same partners that we've already signed as volume players ordering more, and some confirmation of that, but you can expect us to be signing new partners. And that's news flow you'll be seeing in the coming weeks and months, but there's a great deal of discussion going on. And I want to say one more thing about China. Those of you that have followed the story for a while know that we talked a lot about the last 5-year plan, the fact that you can go from, that the Chinese government was mandating that they wanted to take the percentage of rural wastewater that was treated from only 10% to 70% within that 5-year plan. Well, guess what? They missed the target. They got to 25%. So that goal has been carried over, but the central government has told the regional governments, the provincial governments, you need to get your skates on in the next couple of years, meaning this year and next year. And we're seeing some evidence of that in terms of some cluster order discussions that are currently underway. In addition, we've got a lot of activity going on in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, existing projects and more in the pipeline. So that continues to be incredibly important for us, and in the Middle East, similarly. Very important partner discussions and business, both tackling existing projects and follow-on projects from those. But as I said earlier, when we talk about water reuse as a service, using MABR, this for us is an incredibly attractive business model for us to attack the US market, the Caribbean, and potentially some parts of Southeast Asia. So what we would be doing here, let's say, is go to a resort, which is paying to have the wastewater treated and also paying to buy fresh water that they're using to irrigate their landscape. And this is a very common problem in the Caribbean and Sunbelt US. We can, by installing an MABR plant that we pay for and we operate, we can provide them water at half the combined cost of what they would otherwise have to pay for. In other words, they'd pay for the wastewater and the fresh water. So that's incredibly attractive to them because water is often about 10% of the cost in running a resort, and we can do that at a very, very attractive IRR. Effectively, it's like selling MABR for a much, much higher price than the market would ever withstand. So that's the basic summary of the story and how we really can create a multifaceted sustainability story at, maintain EBITDA profitability. I think, Adrian, I don't want to spend too much longer on that because I really wanted to make sure to cover all of those points. But maybe if you just want to quickly flip through the slides. This is a good one talking about the trend to decentralized. And just one quick thing there, you see the picture on the right. That's a good example of a plant that can be disguised to fit into the local vegetation or the local residential area. The next slide. For those of you who don't know us, these are our key products that are already widely deployed in the field. Next, please. As you know, we have a substantial footprint in the geographies indicated there, particularly China, but pretty widely dispersed in other areas as well. Please go ahead. Thank you. Yeah, we talked about the strategy. We can skip this one. And then I think this is some kind of just talking about the recurring revenue opportunity and how the CapEx up front is typically something we would lay off on a partner, mostly like 70% of the CapEx. So we don't have to take that on our balance sheet, but it's a very, very attractive recurring revenue model. Next, please. And of course, a very strong sustainability story. And so I think maybe if you go a couple of slides beyond that, Adrian, to where it just kind of summarizes the numbers for 2020. Yeah, this one here is perfect. Yeah, there you go. So good revenue growth last year, of course, aided significantly by Ivory Coast. I have to say I'm very pleased with how we ended up the year being EBITDA profitable as we had planned, hitting our SPS revenue targets. But we had huge COVID headwinds, primarily due to quarantines. And this is something we're going to continue to have to maneuver around. However, we do anticipate to see that situation improving dramatically as vaccines deploy. So I think that's probably all, Adrian, I'd like to say on the slides. And I really would like to open it up to all of you for questions. Adrian, are you still there?
Apologies, Richard.
There you go.
So just to remind those on the call, best way to ask a question at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section. So feel free to populate those, and I'll put those to Richard to ask, and hopefully we can answer most of them. So so there's a couple that have come in here, Richard. Why don't we just kick this off? The first one. Does Fluence expect to be cash flow positive from FY21 and going forward in the future?
Yeah, so the thing that we've guided the market on is being EBITDA positive on a full year basis. In regards to cash flow, I think you're going to see, especially as long as we have the Ivory Coast project ongoing, which by the way is going very well, you're going to see that cash going up and down. As you know, we received a very sizable amount of cash in Q4. From memory, it was about 60 million US between the advance payments and first milestone payments. But clearly, you know, this is a big project where we have a lot of subcontractors. And so a lot of that money is going to flow back out again to pay those subcontractors to actually do the work. And so for that reason, you'll see the cash balance go up and down. And of course, as I say, we're investing in the business. But the key point that I think to keep your eye on is the EBITDA line as opposed to cash. I will say though that at this point we are comfortable with our cash position.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Interesting question, this one, and it's quite simply, when will we see some sales? It's nearly been a year since a sizable sale. I suspect that your comments may discuss COVID and its impact on the natural flow of the business, but sales, a sales-related question, Richard.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, in the sense that a lot of the business that we've booked in the last few months has been relatively small individual orders, and we've tried to maintain a policy of not announcing absolutely everything that happens, but to announce things that are larger than 3 million in revenue or that have strategic value. So you can certainly anticipate that you will see announcements around, as I say, new partners in the geographies that we've described, which is, I would say, is all four. So that's China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and also potentially US and Caribbean in the recurring revenue space. And based on the discussions that are underway now, there will certainly be announcements about significant sales. Because of this, in part, this push in China to be more aggressive about the rural deployments. And also in Southeast Asia, we're seeing a very strong push for much stricter wastewater treatment standards. For example, the Cambodia plant that we're building currently, and which we expect to be completed in the near future and commissioned, is the first wastewater treatment plant in Cambodia, not the first MABR, the first wastewater treatment plant. So this is a new thing now to embrace that. But without necessarily indicating timeframes, it's certainly not going to be the last. There seems to be a massive amount of infrastructure investment going on there, which is very attractive for us. Similar in the Philippines, not that they didn't have wastewater treatment, but more that they had pretty low quality treatment, and they've now passed very strict regulations, and they will start fining people that don't adhere to them. And very, interestingly, because we now have 8 MABR plants in the Philippines, and people know they work to a very high standard, the water regulator is actually coming to our team in the Philippines and saying, here's a list of all the non-compliant plants, you should contact them. So that doesn't guarantee we win those, but it's a nice source of lead.
Thanks, Richard. I know we've covered this previously, but I think it's worth reiterating with respect to the leadership changes in the group. So the simple question is, why did Henry leave? But it might be worth just reiterating in terms of the leadership changes towards the end of last year.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. So, Henry is an absolutely great guy, 100% honest, extremely hardworking. And I very much enjoyed working with him, but we meaning the board, came to a fundamental disagreement with him where he really felt we should be active in a large number of geographies with a large number of products. And the board came to the view that, look, MABR is an unbelievably valuable asset. And we also have some very good capability in these containerized desalination systems. We really should push those in a small number of geographies, and thereby we can be a lot more efficient with our OpEx, and we can also generate higher margins. And so basically there was a mutual decision between Henry and the board to say, okay, disagreement, Henry leaves, and then we embark on this repositioning.
Thanks, Richard. A couple of questions here, and I'd characterize this as more the threshold for announcing deals to the ASX. And as you know, we have a $3 million threshold, and seems to be a little bit of interest into lowering that amount to provide a continuous update for the market. Just wondered if you could comment on that as well, please.
Yeah, I think that in the early days of the company, when we were very small, we announced basically everything that happened. I mean, quite literally, if you go back to the early days, there were a very, very large number of press releases. And while I know that sometimes that can be reassuring, can also be confusing. And I think really what I'd like to make sure is that we perhaps take more advantage of, should we say, the strategic threshold for an announcement rather than necessarily the dollar threshold. In other words, if let's say an important partner in China buys something from us, which we think is an indication of another step up in the relationship, then that's certainly something we would announce, even if it was relatively small. As you know, we had small deals both with Three Gorges Group and with Beijing China Rail. We announced both of those. They were both very small initial wins. It's quite possible that as follow-ons happen from national scale SOEs who would be the ideal kind of partners for us, we're certainly going to make announcements around that. So I don't think it's necessarily a question of changing the threshold, but maybe being a bit more joined up in our thinking about what's a strategic thing to tell the market about.
Thanks, Richard. Next question. You mentioned the competitive landscape. The question is asked, and can you elaborate on this and what your competitive advantage is?
Yeah, so when it comes to MABR, there's a couple of ways to look at that. One would be to say, what are the other competing approaches, should we say non-MABR approaches? And those would be things like activated sludge and MBR and MBBR and these other acronyms. And the bottom line with those other approaches is we have a substantial advantage against each one, either because we achieve a much higher standard of treatment, which is becoming a requirement in many areas, or because our operating costs to achieve that standard are massively lower than those other approaches. And operating cost is not just the energy issue, but it's the fact that our membranes don't need to be replaced, they don't need to be chemical cleaned, and so on. But there's another element to the answer as well, which is that we have two competitors that have an MABR implementation, Suez and DuPont, and each of those bought those from other entities. And their approaches, both of their approaches, is based on hollow fibers. And those hollow fibers create an architecture which makes them much more amenable to larger plants, because in part, they both need regular chemical cleaning. They need a lot of maintenance. Now, they might be good systems and there are good attributes about them, but it means they service a much smaller piece of the marketplace. And so we believe we have an extremely strong position covering the full spectrum of plant sizes, whereas they're kind of a bit more, should we say, niche product.
Thanks, Richard. This is more a comment and probably inviting a comment from you. Municipal works are very much dependent on national budgets, and China is unique, that has a push from the top.
Yeah, there are different dynamics in each geography. I think that in the case of China, there were a number of dynamics we had to understand and that everybody else had to understand about what in fact is being asked when they talk about rural wastewater treatment. At the beginning, there was this notion, okay, there's a very strict standard, but it wasn't being universally adhered to. That's now being much more strictly enforced. And there also was a shortage of money. And what we're seeing, money to fund those projects that we don't fund, but where the partner that is building and operating the plant also needs to go get the funding from somewhere else. And this isn't just a check that the government gives. Typically, it's another entity that would provide that funding. We're now seeing, along with this urgency to get more stuff done more quickly, that the money is being provided there. It is a bit of a tap from the top, as you say, but it is also the fact that should we say, the entities within the system, I think, those funds are flowing more smoothly. I think in the case of the Philippines, I think it's more about the fact that the water utilities themselves are being told they must be compliant or they will face very significant fines. So there's a natural pressure for that to happen there. And then I think finally, in the case of when we talk about water reuse as a service, there's masses of private funding available to fund projects like that, simply because all it boils down to is we're sharing the IRR on those projects with our financial partner, which in this case is Upwell Water.
Thanks, Richard. Next question. Which other markets have both the motivation and the budget to move on wastewater treatment that we are targeting currently?
So I think we're going to see a great deal of activity in Southeast Asia. I mentioned already the 3 countries where we're active, but I think there's a bunch of other countries in the region that are getting very serious about wastewater treatment. And some of them are recognizing the argument I made at the beginning about this shift from spending money on networks when you have centralized plants towards decentralized, particularly where you have, let's say, a country with lots of islands or a lot of remote communities. That kind of architecture is absolutely obvious to be pursuing. So I think that those are attractive geographies. Longer term, we would expect more activity in Europe. We certainly would expect activity in the US at a certain point in time, but the utilities here tend to move pretty slowly. They're very conservative and they're typically very small. So we don't see the US as an early adopter market by municipalities. But when we talk about commercial users, like resorts, for example, or for that matter, commercial buildings, that's where we're aiming for in the near term.
Thanks, Richard. Just turning to local matters here in Australia. Kind of question is, what are your intentions within Australia with respect to the smaller regional towns and cities?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because I realize we have this rather embarrassing problem that we're listed in Australia, but we don't have a lot of installations there, which I know many of you might like to go and take a look at. And we have made some efforts to get some local sales through reps and so on, but we've seen no fruit coming from that. I think our concern would be, to the extent that there would be, for example, water reuse projects where we could potentially deploy clusters of plants, that would be a fantastic opportunity. And so if we could find those in Australia, that would be where I think we have the greatest potential. Otherwise, at the moment, we're spread pretty thin tackling the geographies we already are.
Richard, this is a slightly technical question, but not really, from somebody who's offering that they're not a very technical person, but just with respect and just trying to understand the products and recognizing they have low maintenance costs. But the simple question is an operational thing. How do you handle the waste material or sludge that comes from the treatment of wastewater?
Yeah, so sludge is unfortunately a fact of life, like many undesirable things. Fortunately, in the MABR systems, the amount of sludge is actually less than in the conventional plants. And the way we design these systems, typically, these decentralized MABR systems, is it's a containerized, complete wastewater treatment plant. And that would include a sludge storage tank, so that you would have a truck, that could roll by every week or two, or possibly as little as once every month or two, to just empty that sludge tank, which would be quite similar to what people do with septic systems right now. So it's a good question, because it has to be tackled efficiently, particularly in a decentralized implementation, but it can be done.
I suspect this next question kind of goes to a bit more of strategic commentary. You are doing CES plants for lithium projects, and just how's that going? And do you expect more in that segment, or is the reduced emphasis on CES making it less likely?
Yeah, so I think this is a classic case of focus, for us, is that we really are emphasizing MABR and desalination. And so the custom engineered solutions, while we can do a good job with those, as we intend to do in Ivory Coast, and in the case of Ivory Coast, of course, some very, very important cash flow coming from that, we want to map the company over towards smart products, whether we are actually selling them as equipment sales, or whether we're selling it on a recurring revenue basis. And we really think it's important to do that, simply because the margins on a custom engineered project are much, much lower than they are on these smart products, and even lower than on recurring revenue. And also because it takes a long, long time to close these custom deals, and a long, long time to execute them. And that lumpy revenue is not very encouraging for any investor, including myself, to see. You want predictable revenue streams.
Thanks, Richard. Not surprised with this next question, given our local sensitivity to it. Given the importance of partnerships, do you have faith that the landscape remains unchanged for you as a listed Australian company operating in China, given current bilateral relations, and also the fate of another listed wastewater treatment company in China recently?
Well, I think there's maybe two different questions there. The first one is how do we do business in China? And one very, very interesting asset that Fluence has, remember, the MABR technology and indeed our desalination solutions were all designed and continue to evolve in Israel. And Israel has an incredible global reputation in the water sector. And so when it comes to China, everything is being sold by a 100% Chinese team that's in 3 different locations there. It's being made by a Chinese team in China, and the technology is Israeli technology. Where we have our factory, for example, in Changzhou, we're in the China-Israel Technology Park, believe it or not. So people tend to see us as an Israeli technology selling in China, through a Chinese team. The geopolitical issue has not arisen any more than it would for any foreign company doing business in China. I think the other question, though, is really more around another player, which is listed in Australia, that appeared to have some accounting irregularities in China. And we have a very, very robust set of internal processes and procedures to do the very best one can to detect anything like that. Lots of delegation of authority, different signature requirements, checking on fund transfers, and so on and so forth. So we believe we are as protected as you can be from anything like that, and have seen no evidence whatsoever of anything like that in China.
Thanks, Richard. Next question, and it goes to a governance-related question. Is the company actively looking for board members?
We are actively looking for a female board member. I think we have a board and far too male a management team, and getting more gender balance would be is a high priority for us. We had 2 board members step down, plus of course Henry was also on the board. So we've gone from a board of 7 to a board of 4 at the moment, including myself and that will be 5 when we add the female board member.
Thanks, Richard. Question on the competitive landscape. What would hinder Suez or DuPont offering smaller niche plants, and how do you protect yourself against these companies with obviously significant resources to can come to the market?
Yeah, so I think if you look at how the systems are implemented, these are basically, I would say, conceptually similar to our Subre system. These are modules. In that case, it's kind of rectangular racks that drop into existing aeration basins. And you could also do a new build plant in the same way. But it tends to naturally drive them toward larger plant sizes. If you look at both, the websites and materials that they put out, and we know the teams as well. That's really what they're looking for, is retrofits. And so, yeah, there is some competition for us when it comes to like Subre versus those alternatives. And there are some places where we make more sense, some places where they do. But on the smaller plant sizes, they really don't, as far as we know, don't have products that are in the form factor where, as I say, we can really go from clusters of homes up to a few thousand people in these containerized solutions, where you have an entire wastewater treatment plant and not just, if you like, the module by itself. And there's been a lot of engineering that we've wrapped around MABR to be able to produce those smaller units. And I have to say, we're doing it very profitably now, even in China.
Richard, next question. Views on the likelihood of the new US administration being more favorable to the decentralized model, and is Fluence focusing on the US?
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're very, very interested in water reuse as a service to commercial customers, particularly resorts and commercial properties. I do believe that the Biden administration and some of the policies that it's following will be favorable toward water and wastewater infrastructure. And I do believe that there is a strong interest in the US around decentralized. I suspect that it may prove to be the case that decentralized first finds a home not only in smaller communities, of course, as we have elsewhere, but also maybe where you're trying to get homes off septic systems. There's still a vast number of households in the US, I believe it's something like 40% of US homes are still on septic systems. And these are starting, especially where you're near a body of water like a river or a lake or the ocean, you're starting to get leaching of nutrients, nitrogen, basically fertilizer, leaking out into those bodies of water and causing algae blooms. So there is some pressure to do that, and that may be where we see initial demand. And we do have some discussions with partners around helping us attack that market.
Thanks, Richard. Next question. What is the mix between government versus commercial? And the question here is, for example, some water companies have provided containerized solutions to resource companies. Does Fluence plan to focus in this space?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to resources, we remember that MABR is treating organic wastewater. I mean, to put it bluntly, good old-fashioned sewage. It's not suitable for mining water and the kind of things you need to extract when you're treating that kind of produced water or the kind of water that you would get from a mine. So that's not a target for us, other than potentially providing treatment systems to the camps for those who are working on the mines, where you need to have some way to treat that water somehow rather than just dumping it. And where often there's a good use locally for the recycled water, for example, for dust suppression and other non-drinking needs. But we don't see that as an attractive target. In regards to dealing with governments, in many markets, certainly in China and everywhere, most of the places we're working in Southeast Asia, we are dealing with at least municipalities. In order to, and they may not be the actual buyer, but they certainly need to buy into what we're proposing to do in their areas. So having relationships with them is beneficial, but typically there are other partners involved as well.
Thank you. Richard, just the next question. And just remind those that want to ask a question to use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So the next question, when do you expect the China factory to reach full production capacity?
So as we've said many times in regards to that production line, it has the capacity to produce about $75 million worth of modules per year. We have had situations where there's been bursts of demand where we've had to run 3 shifts. We are continually looking at upgrading the performance of that line in terms of higher throughput in any given amount of time. So far, we've been able to operate within the capacity of that line. But remember, too, that the facility we have can accommodate up to 3 more lines like that. And it's quite possible that a future line would not just be a carbon copy of the one we have there. In other words, it would be higher throughput, etc. So we're in a very fortunate position because typically when you make your own stuff and also you need your own machines to make your own stuff, you can often have to spend vast amounts on capital equipment. And for each $75 million worth of revenue per annum that we produce of just the modules, let alone the systems that wrap around them, we only need to spend about $1.5 million in CapEx for each of those production lines. So it's very, very capital efficient, and we pretty likely would source future machinery in China. So there would be, I think, a very rapid path to bring a new lab as needed. So I think we're probably okay for this year, but it really does depend on the timing of some of those cluster orders that I've referred to.
And just on that point, one other question, how big are the big orders you're discussing in China revenue-wise?
Big. I'm afraid I can't give you any numbers on that, but as you've seen with the, particularly with the iTest relationship, which is the longest running volume partnership, we've had situations where they've bought, as I say, sometimes several dozen plants in a single order. And certainly the projects we're talking about are in very interesting size ranges in terms of number of units and the sizes of those units. So that, stay tuned. We'll certainly be disclosing the information when it happens, but it's not going to be one plant here and one plant there.
Thanks, Richard. A couple more just coming in now. And this goes to execution. What is the capacity of your sales team? And is there an appetite to increase the numbers in light of the increased need for the decentralized model? And simply, is Fluence trying to sell as much as possible or to strategically go slow?
We are very definitely trying to sell as much as possible. Absolutely. We are not going slow. Anything that slows us down is quarantines. But I have to say, too, the best route to market for us, and this applies to every geography that we're active in, whether it's China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, or US, the best route to market is through partners. So our salespeople tend to be pretty senior people that can negotiate those kinds of partner transactions, work with a partner for one plant, but do that because that partner has the potential to buy a lot more and nurture the relationship up to the level where there's a reason for that partner to engage with us. So it's really about the bandwidth of our sales forces, their bandwidth to forge partnerships, not to sell systems.
Thanks, Richard. This looks like this might be the final one. So does Fluence, oh no, sorry, there's another one that's just popped in, apologies. Does Fluence need to maintain a continuously high level of R&D to stay competitive?
So we do believe it's terribly important to invest, particularly in evolving MABR. We believe, I think you can look at any technology product and say that over the life of that product, you can typically improve its price performance by about an order of magnitude, by about a factor of 10. And we're partway down that curve, but we want to keep driving it down. We already believe we have a significantly lower materials cost for our MABR than our competitors, which is very helpful. So that, with the actual capital cost, if you like, of making the product, not just the operating issues. But we do believe it's important to do that. Having said that, our team in Israel that is responsible for this, and also the folks in China who do a lot of localization type of development work, are pretty small and pretty. It's already a small percentage of revenues. Most of our operating costs are really around sales and support functions, not R&D.
So final question, Richard, before I throw back to you for some closing remarks. Can you give an update on the relationship with China Rail and Three Gorges, and are they likely to place orders? Bit cheeky.
Yeah, so when you look at the partners we have in China, so we have I think approximately 40 partnerships in China. Some of them are private companies, some are provincial level state-owned enterprises, and a few are national state-owned enterprises. So Beijing China Rail and Three Gorges are absolutely examples, of that latter category. Now, if you think about who would be the most desirable partners for us to forge some kind of volume relationship with, it's clearly people in that national SOE category, particularly if they're known in the water space. Because now you not only have the opportunity to be sourcing projects from all over the country, and indeed many of those SOEs, national SOEs, are active internationally, but you also potentially, if they make a visible commitment to Fluence, you have the potential that you have kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval in the China market. If a national SOE says, we're working with Fluence, that's very, very powerful. So for that reason, we pay a very great deal of attention to these relationships. You mentioned two that we have talked about publicly, and both of those relationships continue to progress. There are two more that we have not named that are also we're also in significant discussions with. Now, which one of those is going to come out first with something dramatic, I can't predict, but it's absolutely our target to make that happen in the coming months.
Thanks, Richard. We've exhausted the questions, so I'll just throw it back to you for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you for being the MC on the questions. Look, I really appreciate everybody joining, and I really appreciate the quality of the questions as well. It's been a great session, and I would really encourage you all to keep a close eye on us. We really believe that with this new focus, we will not only be efficient in the way we operate, but we will be more effective. In other words, as evidenced by material announcements. So believe me, we're working hard on that right now, and you can assume there will be some news, so I'm not just going to tell you when.
Okay. Thank you, Richard, and thanks once again for everybody joining us too. That ends the session. Good morning.
Thank you all. Bye-bye now.